Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of Chewing the Fat with myself and Dean Kilby. Welcome again, Dean. Thanks for being with us. I know you're a bit under the weather this week, so a lot going on for you and some big things. So thanks for joining me.
Pleasure. Good to see you.
Yeah. We've been getting asked to delve into a couple of things this week. One of them I wanted to know, and also a couple of other people wanted to know something else about women versus men. And I think we touched on it in one of the earlier ones.
Right.
Obviously not far enough. So why don't we start with that? How do we talk about the difference between weight loss with women and men, if there's any different nutritional needs for them? Is it easier or harder for them to lose weight? Is it easier or harder for them to put on weight, and how and why and all that sort of thing?
In terms of weight loss, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, the mechanism is exactly the same. They lose weight, generally speaking, about half the rate at which men lose weight.
Right.
And that's primarily because of the fact that men have more muscle mass on average. So given that your skeletal muscle is the primary calorie burner, then it makes sense. If you've got more muscle, you're going to burn through the calories from your own fat stores faster.
Yep.
So typically the protocol that you're on, men typically lose 2 to 3 kilograms per week, and women typically lose 1 to 1.5.
Right.
So the amount of muscle mass is one. The other one is the hormonal profile. So our hormones are like this. So, with men, it's pretty linear. Women's hormones are like this. So it depends on what's happening with their menstrual cycle, for example. And that can result in fluid retention. So it can slow it down from time to time. And then in terms of coaching different clients, women tend to cheat more than men. because of the hormones and the fluctuations in mood as well.
Right.
And they've developed over many years various coping mechanisms, and a lot of the time food is involved. So it takes some time for those patterns of behavior to be altered. Men don't think about things as much. They just kind of, okay, I'll just do what I'm told. And so their weight loss is pretty linear. But yeah, women tend to cheat more. Sometimes they think about it too much, get a little bit too clever. Men are just happy eating some pretty ordinary meals for a really long time. And so that's kind of generally sums up the difference in terms of the weight loss.
Yeah.
On protocol, what do you have to be responsible for? Well, it's kind of a little bit the opposite. So with men, the more fat that you carry, the more testosterone you convert to estrogen. So as you lose the fat, particularly that around your belly, you'll convert less of the testosterone to estrogen. So a lot of men, particularly post 40, that I have on protocol, they lose the weight, but they start feeling amazing. And when I say feeling amazing, I mean they got more circulating testosterone. They just find it easier to get up for the game in many respects. And I don't just mean in terms of sexual vitality. I also mean just general vitality in life.
Yep.
And then women, it's the opposite. So women store estrogen in their fat. So a lot of estrogen gets locked up in their fat tissue. And as they lose the weight, that estrogen gets released. So I have some younger women, sometimes who are on protocol, they might ovulate twice a month. So I have to instruct some of my female clients, particularly if they're sexually active, they've got to make sure that their partner wears a condom. Even if they're on the oral contraceptive pill, a lot of the time it just won't cut it because there's all that estrogen being released from the fat tissue. So having said that, there have been a number of couples, the females gone on protocol with the intention to get well, to get pregnant, even if they've attempted, in vitro fertilization in the past, or they've been trying to get pregnant. I put them on this diet. Yes, they get well, but then they also get pregnant. So, and then it's contraindicated for pregnancy. So once you're pregnant, you come off protocol and you just do what your obstetrician says.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Cool.
And on that
note,
they're
kind of the key differences.
On the note of hormones too, because that just reminded me of something. You often see like ads for things and whatever saying, by the time you hit 40, your testosterone levels are plummeting, and do this and do that, and to increase testosterone. Are there actual things you can do besides what you said then about losing weight, which then converts less testosterone to estrogen, but obviously there's also less testosterone there to start with, yes?
Can be. I mean, the best thing you can do if you're a man is, and either, right? Men, women, just don't get fat. If and it's not just about living longer, it's living long healthfully. Even if your total life length doesn't increase, you want to have the maximal number of healthful years. And if you look at there's a field in science called nutrigenomics, and this studies the impact of various nutrients that we consume on our gene expression and epigenetics. So there are, there's some research that details the impact of what they call youth gene clusters. These are a set of different genes that are expressed, turned on or off, depending on how young you are. So these can be reset to a younger state depending on how you manage your nutrition. And a lot of these youth gene clusters regulate sexual vitality as well.
Right.
So, as I said, not just about the ability to, have sex or be up for sex, but just that spring in your step, that kind of, when you're sexually vital, you socialize differently, you participate in life differently, you are up to more things, bigger things, more vigorously, you go for it in life, you're more motivated. So you want to have that as long as possible. Certainly smoking will suppress that. Obesity will suppress that. Drug use. You want to do things to manage that. So what's good for your heart is good for your brain. Seems to be good for sexual vitality as well.
It's a win-win-win. Is there anything are there anything like diet-wise that does boost testosterone and things like that, or it's just about general well-being?
Oh, look, there are, but you first have to handle that which is suppressing your vitality in life. I mean, certainly anything that's going to be inflammatory. So high sugar diets, excess amounts of fat, grains and dairy, for a lot of people can be inflammatory. Just removing them, being dehydrated, all of this suppresses vitality. It's going to have an impact on your hormones and sexual hormones. So firstly, I think the key point for the majority of people is handle that which is suppressing your vitality in the first place.
Yeah.
Looking for supplements and foods that are going to increase your testosterone whilst you're living a crappy lifestyle and eating a shitty diet. I mean, it's pointless.
For sure.
It's that's kind of like saying, I don't know, having a slightly healthier lunch when you continue to smoke. It's like, who gives a fuck? Like, just keep smoking and die already.
I was talking to my mate today who's works with a guy that's fairly overweight, and he's just started taking man shakes. And but one meal a day of man shakes, but then back on the ribs and pizza at night. And he's like, well, it's better than having a quarter chicken and chips at lunchtime than it is, but what's the point if you're having hamburgers and ribs and chips at night anyway?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many amazing products, like these protein products, and they've got great ingredients in them. And, some of them are pretty shit in terms of it's easy to put a product out there and use cheap protein. And, you and I have tried so many of them. And I mean, you have a more generous palate than mine. I think most of them taste like shit.
Nice way to put it.
But and then you go on various websites and they look amazing, and they use a lot of testimonials from clients and so forth. But you're right, unless there's a committed relationship between a dieter and a structured protocol, and a committed relationship between the dieter and the coach, it's really bloody hard for people to self-manage, to just follow like some guidelines and utilize various products. For the most part, they tend to be a waste of money. And then people will say, oh, the shakes didn't work. It wasn't the shakes that didn't work. Because you didn't know what you were doing. And it's for the most part, it's of no one's fault. It's not like the dieter's fault. They don't know. How's everyone supposed to know? So it has to be within the entire context of education, and you're learning. And it's like, you might have a shake or two shakes, but what else are you having? Not just that day, but over the course of the week. Are you overstressing yourself with excessive amounts of exercise? Are you eating the wrong products that are causing too much inflammation? So they've got other ingredients in them that are inflammatory, and that can inhibit the weight loss as well. So, there's all kinds of things. Or sometimes you're just not getting enough fiber because you don't eat your vegetables, and so you don't shit when you should, and you're a bit clogged up, and so you get on the scales and you haven't lost any weight, and people just throw their hands up and go, oh, it's not working. It's not. You just need to do a shit.
Clogging me up.
Exactly. Right. So there's many things to it. If it was as simple as have a shake once or twice a day, or some kind of protein product, then we would have handled the obesity epidemic by now if it was that damn simple. And it can be pretty simple, but there's a few different facets to it.
Have to come together, which brings me to last week or so on Today Show or something in the morning. One of the guys on there is porking up a bit and has got this guy in to put him on a diet and help him lose the weight. And one of the things, and this has been a thing that's been around for a long time as well, where they say, and this is what they were saying the other day, you've got to, we're going to put you on this diet and you've got to lose the weight properly and slowly so that it stays off over time versus just being on some crash diet and whatever. Is that how it works? Like, does it matter how rapidly you lose the weight? Because I know a lot of people, when they talk to me and say, how long have you lost, 15 kilos, 6 weeks, 6.5 weeks, they're like, friggin' what? What is this, the bulimic diet? Someone said today. But no. But that's a general consensus as well. You've got to lose it very slowly over time. Otherwise, you're just going to put it back on again in the end. Is there reality behind that, or?
No. So all the clinical scientific evidence suggests that rapid weight loss is preferred.
Right.
It's just historically how people have lost weight fast is just by starving themselves. So, protein meal replacement products or meal replacement products in the scientific literature, they work. Okay. And so if you look at the majority of meal replacement products, they contain all the various components of the macronutrients, so proteins, carbs, fats, all the vitamins, nutrients, minerals, etc. and they try and squeeze all of that into a lower calorie.
Yeah.
The problem is it leaves people hungry all the time.
Mm.
So if you're still consuming carbohydrates, then you're going to keep stimulating that part of your brain that's going to drive you to want to eat more carbs.
Mm.
And if you're just on a liquid diet, then everything slows down and you don't stretch your gut properly. So when your gut stretches, it releases a hormone called ghrelin. Ghrelin came about, 1999 or something like that. It was discovered that your gut actually releases a hormone. And prior to that, we didn't think that the gut was an endocrine organ.
Right.
And then in 1999, those discoveries were made. And at that time, I was a researcher. I was a lab rat in a laboratory that was a world leader in growth factors and how to measure these hormones in our bloodstream, etc. So my supervisor back then, Professor Rob Baxter, who was recently awarded an AM on the Queen's birthday list, so he developed an assay for this hormone called ghrelin. Anyway, the ghrelin goes to your brain and it tells you that you're full. So people make the mistake when they're trying to lose weight of eating less volume of food.
Yeah.
So although you need to decrease the calories, you need to keep the volume of food quite substantial. Otherwise, you're constantly going to be hungry.
Mm.
And if you're always hungry, then you're more likely to deviate, cheat, just shoot yourself in the foot, right? So where was I going with that? What was the question?
About the slowness and how quickly you lose.
Oh, yeah. So you've got like, for example, bariatric surgery, you lose weight fast. But those who have been successful with bariatric surgery, there's been a few other elements at play other than just shrinking the size of the stomach. So if you put a band on your stomach, for example, and you shrink the size of that storage organ, so your stomach it just stores food. It doesn't really, yes, it's acidic and so forth, but digestion happens primarily in your intestines. The stomach just holds the food until your intestines is ready. But if you shrink the size of that to 80 mils, which is the usual size after surgery, you can't hold as much food. So people just end up eating less and they lose the weight. But for you to be successful long term, your hormones need to rebalance at the same time. Your brain needs to rewire as well. All the time, it's so rapid that those two processes don't happen. And then post-surgery, not everyone gets the sort of post-surgery support that they require. It might be a couple of visits with a dietitian, and that's just not that's not enough to retrain people how to live. So oftentimes their brain still craves carbohydrates, and they find ways to get those calorie-dense foods into them. Whether they blend Mars bars or whatever it might be, just to get it in. It happens. It really happens. You laugh. It's true.
Oh, blending Mars bars.
Because they can't get the volume in. So, but listen, the brain just needs that amount of calories, and they find ways. I mean, so what? Short of bariatric surgery, even if you just starved yourself and you lost the weight, so your weight came down like this, with that weight loss, you lose a lot of muscle mass.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, muscle is the primary calorie burner. So then everything slows down because you lose muscle mass as well. So you don't burn as many calories. So then it becomes easier to put the weight back on. Okay. So this yo-yo dieting effect. So people have extrapolated their thinking and they say, well, if rapid weight loss results in rapid weight gain, then slower weight loss must be better and more sustainable. It's just not true.
Right.
All the data says when done properly, rapid weight loss is preferred. Now, once you lose the weight, now the rubber hits the road. You have to learn how to sustain yourself in an environment where you do have freedom of choice. So for example, when we transition you out of your weight loss phase, firstly, we have to do it in a very controlled manner. We've got to step your calories back up to a normal diet. You can't just jump straight back up. That'll just shock everything. Also, we have to turn your pancreas back on. So you haven't been eating carbohydrates for a long time. And that's important to give your pancreas a break from releasing all that excess amount of insulin that it was doing. And we've got to reactivate your pancreas with just a very controlled amount of carbohydrates and fat back in your diet once a day, just to spike your insulin levels. And then your body's got to learn to let that insulin come down.
Right.
And then the rest of your tissue, your muscle, your fat, your liver has to learn to operate on that normal level of insulin now. And after a couple of weeks, we'll have restocked your muscle glycogen stores. That's the glycogen is the carbohydrate storage form in your muscles and your liver. And then in phase 4, that's about training you and your brain how to keep your body at this new health set point.
Right.
And that'll involve weekly challenges. We call them indulgence days, where you'll eat whatever you want, as much as you want. And then the next day you go back into phase 1, the weight loss phase, just for that one day, just to correct everything. And we retrain your neuroendocrine system to deal with those challenges until that kind of behavior becomes innate.
Yeah.
You don't have to kind of force yourself. You'll just do it naturally. And that's generally what happens when those annoyingly skinny people who seemingly indulge on everything, you see them eat whatever they want. What you don't see is how they manage themselves over the next 24, 48 hours.
Mm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I could already
see the
case, because even now, I think I spoke to you about this before with talking to someone else. The times when I can't, like when I do eat a meal, like say for dinner, when I feel remotely, like when I started to feel remotely full, and I'm, like tonight, and then I started with the salad as well, like, the lettuce and whatever. And I was thinking, I'm feeling full, like it feels like I'm eating too much, because it's like you said, expanding your stomach. So no doubt at that point where you can just eat whatever you want, it's going to be nowhere near the level that it used to be before you're like, hang on.
Yeah.
It'd be easier to then the next day, instead of just plowing on and going, I've still got 4 donuts left. Awesome.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I shared with you earlier, Professor Tom Barodi for the Center for Digestive Diseases, he wants to put layers of research on top of my work to see what happens to the gut microbiome. So we're getting into shit together, and he's going on protocol. I'm coaching him, and we're going to take stool samples in the beginning and see what happens to his shit later. And I'm also interested in the gut to brain interplay and how that, how that alters the brain, because we all get addicted to these foods that are carbohydrate and fat combinations, in particular, for many people it's chocolate, some people it's dairy type foods, ice cream and so forth. For others, it's the savory end, deep fried potato, right? They just have to have chips or so.
No, their body,
the
body needs,
sorry?
Their body needs the chips.
Oh yeah.
I just need it.
And I like being kind to my body, so I'm not going to deprive my body of what my body wants, and I'm going to have the chips and hot dogs and everything. So you have the parts in your brain that light up like ding, 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 ding. The same regions that light up when you're addicted to a drug like cocaine, for example. So if you look at positron emission tomography scans of the brain, and you compare cocaine to sugar, it looks almost exactly the same.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Unfortunately, what happens is it gets to the point where the dopamine receptors, and it just stops working the way that it's supposed to, where it's like you consume something and you experience a sense of reward and satisfaction, and then it's like it's handled, you're satisfied. It stops working that way.
That's how the drugs get you into trouble in the first place, because you're just not getting the
Exactly.
same reward for the same input. Yeah,
That's right. So you don't experience the reward.
Yeah.
It lights up in the anticipation of eating those foods. And then when you do eat them, it doesn't satisfy it. So you're left craving, wanting more.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, ice cream ruined us the first time we had it. And then you spend the rest of your life trying to recreate that first experience. And it never happens. People do that in relationships as well. They try and recreate that first experience and it ruins all subsequent relationships, because they never learn to kind of just let that be and create your life newly. Yeah. So yeah, there's lots to learn. Yeah.
Learning stuff all the time. It's awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's cool is I've got Professor Joseph Maroon. He's the team neurosurgeon for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the US. And he's also the senior vice president of the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. So I speak to him regularly. And then just more recently, I've got another neurosurgeon, Dr. Cial, up in Newcastle. She's fascinated with my work and is just like, yep, love to support in any way I can. And then I've got a neurobiologist in LA, Kristen Willamere. She's just phenomenal. And we touch base every now and again. And she did all the originating SPECT, SPECT scans of the NFL players and looked at their brains, you know, the people who play these contact sports. And I mean, it's more than a contact sport. It's a collision sport. And their brains compared to a normal brain are just an absolute mess. Yeah, right. So they develop degenerative neurological disorders much younger. They have an inability to regulate certain emotions, in particular anger, and they have a shorter lifespan. Now, if you compare an NFL player's brain, which to a normal person's brain looks like a mess, if you compare an NFL player's brain to an amateur boxer's brain, the amateur boxer's brain makes the NFL player's brain look almost normal.
Wow.
Yeah, you can imagine these subconcussive knocks constantly. And the way that the brain sits in the skull, it's constantly moving back and forth because it's not attached to anything. Yeah. And it's just bathed in this fluid and it's constantly moving. So if you get hit in the head and your brain hits one side of your skull, it's going to bounce back and hit the other side of the skull. Plus there's a bit of bone on the bottom that causes shearing.
Right.
On the brain, on the neural tissue.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I mean, all these, when women complain that men are so immature, yeah, this is why. We took all those knocks to the head when we were teenagers playing these stupid sports that, you know, got
that, I was thinking, when I was a kid, my dad used to take me to boxing and things like that. You'd stand in a boxing ring punching and getting punched in the head while you're a little kid and your brain's developing still. And, you're 15 years old, you're playing football and you get knocked out and your brain's still not fully developed. And then, later on, I'm 30, 36, 37 or something, and get hit by a car and bang, I'm knocked out there. And racing motorbikes, I got knocked out in a crash there as well. And you just start thinking, oh,
yeah,
I wonder if I can get snappy.
Well, one of my colleagues and experts that I refer to is Dr. Eric Hansen. He's a chiropractor, but he does a lot of neurorehabilitation. Right. And he's got this phenomenal clinic in Gladesville. And I went there and he's got a quantitative electroencephalography. So you put this thing on your head and it can measure your brain activity and it's fascinating because you can see all the hypo and hyper regions. So particularly where there's overstimulation, say for example, chronic pain. If you've got constantly in chronic pain, there's a lot of information that's being sent to your brain from that pain region. And so much information that your brain just starts to dampen down the activity.
Right.
otherwise it's too much energy it needs to invest in managing that information. So you get these hypo areas of the brain, and then you've got other areas that are hyperactive. And then all the compensatory mechanisms in your brain that deal with that. And looking at my brain, I didn't play all these contact sports just because I was too scrawny. I was scared of getting my neck snapped in half. But, you know, I could see parts of my brain that I remembered. It's like, oh yeah, that was when I was knocked out on the soccer field at 18. And oh yeah, I remember getting into that fight when I was younger, or when I fell and hit my head when I was 25. And the regions of the brain that help regulate sleep. And at that time I had some insomnia issues. It all shows up. It's freaking amazing.
Yeah, wow.
So it's all there. Yeah.
That'd be really interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Is there anything else we want to touch on before we leave it?
There's always lots.
Well, we got to come back next week. So
yeah. All right. Next week, hopefully I can share more about what I'm doing with COVID-19.
Yeah.
And the new serology test that can determine functional immunity. And this is a test that hopefully, my commitment is that it helps us to get out of the lockdown. Going into lockdown is easy. Unlocking society is the hard bit that no one really is clear of how to do. And I think the private sector needs to lead the way. Corporations need to lead the way. Government's going to take too long. And there's this test and treatment option that I think could make a big difference. So we're talking to a number of key leaders around the world, from the United Nations and various airports and airlines like Qantas, etc. So hopefully next week I'll be able to update a little bit more on what's happening on that front. It's important because we all want to be, you know, safe and assured, and I need to get to the pub.
Yeah, well, yeah, that too.
I mean, the pubs are open, but it's like, you know, people are still cautious, and rightly so. But I think we're pretty lucky here in Australia. The prevalence is so damn low. But we will see what will happen, particularly given the recent protests, and also heading into the flu season as well. I mean,
I think there's a lot of pressure to get back in the game, and, you know, everyone to open up. And if they're protesting, then why can't we open and do all that sort of stuff? But it's only like one of the football games was cancelled today because one of the players' kids was at a school where someone tested positive. So game postponed till tomorrow until they can work out, you know, the contact and all that sort of stuff between the kids. So it's not going to take much for them to go, bang, close it all back down again.
Well, everyone's got to keep in mind, even though the prevalence is so low, every pandemic starts with one person coughing or sneezing on one other. And that, you know, the SARS epidemic, you know, 17 years ago, whenever that was one person who got in a lift with 6 other people and coughed. And these 6 other people just happened to be from 6 different countries. I mean, it couldn't have been scripted any better. And they went back to their own countries, and we had this, you know, epidemic. So, you know, we've got to deal with it responsibly. I don't think, you know, no country is ever going to shut their economy down again. It's just been, the impact is just enormous. So there's where I did my honours degree, there's an institute called the Australian Animal Health Laboratories that's recently changed its name now to the Australian, what's it called? Australian Infectious Diseases, Australian Institute of Disease Preparedness.
Right.
Something like that. So it's all about being prepared for the inevitable. And there's going to be more. I mean, these bats have hundreds of viruses just that we haven't yet sampled. So, you know, they'll come out at some point, and it's not just bats, it's other animals. And the more that we encroach on their natural habitats and interact with these animals more, you know, the more chance that there is for transmission from, we call it spillover, from one species to another. So We'll talk more about that next week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what's going on. Cool.
Yeah.
Right, thanks for joining me. Thanks, guys. Any questions as usual? Just
happy birthday, MT.
happy birthday.
I know you put that in your note, but
have to. You know she's going to watch right to the end.
Never. But at least we can say that we said it.
We said
she
it.
doesn't crack the shits with us too.
See you next week, guys. Thanks for joining in.